A very good morning to you all. Welcome to Sunrise Daily today. I'm Chamberlain also.
Well, we're up bright and early here in Lagos. I'm Kayode Okikelu.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us yet again. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo.
And from Abuja, good morning. I'm Maokpe Ogun Yusuf.
Fire on the mountain, and nobody seems to be on the run. Oh, there is fire on the mountain top, and no one is surrounding. I wake up in the morning, tell you what I see on my TV screen. I see the blood of an innocent child.
Well, we're not trying to jazz people up this morning, actually.
Maybe you're jazzed up anyway, but clearly not the intention, well, not the immediate intention. And so that was at the launch, the official unveiling of the new Nnpc. Of course, a lot of us are familiar with the music of Asha. That song was released about 15 years ago, and it's quite interesting that the lyrics of that music can still, you can relate with it, still resonates with the reality of Nigeria today. For a lot of people, it was a bit tricky because, the event was the unveiling of a new Nnpc, with the pomp, the pageantry, quite an elaborate and elegant event. But she came to stage and delivered that music. The president was seated almost opposite her. We had the Senate president, the speaker. We had essentially top government dignitaries seated. And, the choice of that song got a lot of people talking on and off social media. And, it just brought up the role of entertainers, the role of artists in politics and governance. They have different options. They can choose to entertain, even like the media, they can choose to educate, they can choose to inform, sometimes choose to speak truth to power. A lot of them align with Fela Anikulapo Kuti and say, well, that is where the Afrobeat came from. And we know what he was known for. So during this whole political season, electioneering season, there will be a lot of attention on entertainers and how well they can translate their clout, in the entertainment industry to perhaps making a positive change in the politics and governance of our nation. So the question is, fire on the mountain, what are we doing about it?
Interesting, Kayode. I was watching yesterday, just as Asha started that performance, and the choice of the song was my first observation. The message was not lost on me. I wonder if the message was lost on political office holders that were seated. I hope it was not, Whether it's the performing arts or the non-performing arts, the role of, artists and artists is to mirror life. Sometimes they become part of the story. You can't blame them. Some entertainers have become the official performers at campaign rallies for political parties, and in fact become the extended public relations manager of certain politicians. Abacha's 2 million man march comes to mind briefly now, and we all know the entertainers that performed during the Youths Earnestly Ask for Abacha. The thing about posterity is that it's a very dispassionate judge, and such things, such roles of entertainers immediately come to mind, when these subjects become talking points. So it's part of the legacy that they leave behind. And some of them are, becoming more active in politics now, in electioneering campaigns and in political roles. But what are they going to do with it? Is it just, to use that clout, to add to their CV, or is it to use that clout to cause a change? Well, posterity will be kind or unkind to artists and artists. Maokwe.
Well, the beautiful thing about art, is that you can take anything you want to take away from it. It's all about perspective. By the way, the Nnpc's, it's Nnpc Limited, because it's still the Nigerian National Petroleum Company. It's now a company limited. Put up a good showing yesterday. The event was, as Kaide did say, elegant and elaborate. It was, you know, very well choreographed. And it was a good thing that they had class acts. I mean, the fact that we were able to bring in our international star. When I heard that song, I wasn't looking at the TV, so I was asking, is she there live? And then, of course, the choice of the song. But then I said, hey, you are talking about energy for today, energy for tomorrow. So maybe, I mean, maybe she was referring to climate change. I mean, Europe is 40 degrees now, isn't it? Maybe she was. So I think that you will take from it, it will convict you where you need to be convicted, assuming the song was meant to convict and not just speak, you know, out of her beautiful album, which everybody loved to sing from. So it's all about perspective. But I do hope that our leaders got the perspective which a lot of people thought they were supposed to get from that. Asha's intention might be totally different, and I think that it's all about your reading of whatever it is that she's put out there, and that's the beauty about art. You can be looking at one work and everybody will have a very different interpretation to it, but I hope that the very obvious one, which a lot of people are pointing out to the leaders, which leaders should get from this, is what they got from it yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen.
Isn't that the beauty of art?
Absolutely.
When you just, so many people looking for different perspectives, and people just internalizing it the way it hits them. So she could even say, I just sang my song.
Yeah.
You know,
In fact,
I just did my thing.
Is it a nursery rhyme or what is it?
Well, some could see it as an allegory, but, you know, wow, it's the way this kind of thing just catch on. You
And
just
we're
like,
here having,
oh, wow.
taking
Wow.
aspirin over somebody else's
I think we're just
headache.
enjoying the good music, honestly.
Yeah, but, you know, all this kind of things, it's whatever circumstances people are going through, you tend to see things that what we call the personal recognition system of people immediately kicks in. So whatever you see points to one thing or the other. So all of those things usually just add up and then have that kind of ripple effect on things. And so, but look, it is what it is. Society is going through certain things, and we cannot bury our heads or play the ostrich. And so they find certain means, whichever way, to just send messages. And perhaps, boy, was the street media, social media out there buzzing about all of that. But what was showing it was, and by the way, we'll talk about some of what transpired yesterday in the course of the programming here today. So that said, wow, beautiful piece. And good to see Nigerian artists also doing the thing there, as a matter of fact. Don't forget that bit. So lots of positives, as a matter of fact, whichever way you look at it, actually. So see things on the bright side. Well, that said, we'll delve right into the papers in a moment. Welcome back. Let's run you through some of the dailies. We'll start with the Guardian newspaper today. High, low expectations as Buhari unveils new Nnpc. We will end energy poverty, losses, says Kyari. Why Nnpc may remain loss-making company despite transitioning, experts. Redundant staff, political will, harsh environment, clouds worry, stakeholders' expectations. Transitioning, a mere name change, says Famufimi. Former LCCI boss insists on new Aramco may emerge. Adesanya, subsidy liabilities, frontier exploration may impact cash flow. OPS back hike as oil marketers comply with Nnpc directive, raised petrol price to 179 naira per litre. Now that is a huge talking point about this bit of raising petrol pump prices. Many questions concerning, okay, is there an official communication about this? Are they all answered? Because I mean, even up until yesterday, some still put at 165 naira per litre. So wherein lies this? Well, now that it's out there, who knows if the corporation, the company, will eventually speak up about this one. APC unveils Shetima as Tinubu's running mate despite opposition. Is that not supposed to happen today, I think?
The
Unveiling.
Oh, yeah, it's Wednesday.
So,
Yeah.
but, okay, I think they're playing safe. So, APC unveils Shetima as Tinubu's running mate despite opposition. You also see that right there. NMA laments mass exodus of doctors, health workers from Ondo.
You know what someone was saying recently, that, you know, in some of those other countries, you're getting to the start of a new session. And they're saying, watch out for lots of resignations in companies and all of that for those who are moving outside. And I'm thinking, just really? I thought we were still trying to brave this whole process, and to hear that more people might even be leaving.
And then there'll be September as well. So,
And then there'll be January,
seasons.
December, January.
those seasons, I
The
think we should
seasons
just
are
look out for that.
synonymous with mass exoduses
Well-
from the medical sector.
Generally, I mean, that's when...
Not just that sector.
The academic session in some other countries,
Yeah.
that's when it starts. But you know what? Take a look at Nigeria News Direct this morning. This is what you find on the front page. FG unveils Nnpc Limited as reactions trail alleged 178 naira PMS price hike. You know, it's been different experiences for different people. Some even have to pay this much and still pay like entry fee into the filling station. And I do wonder, what is it for? 200, 500, what is it for?
Well, it's just like restating the obvious, really, because last week I bought fuel for 203 naira per litre. And Chamberlain says he bought fuel just yesterday for 165 naira per litre. So, well, where are we?
Well, we're still on the front page of Nigeria News Direct, and we're talking about the Nnpc, and you just wonder how this will change, you know, the outlook, essentially. Oil marketers commend FG on new feed. Fault claim of pump price increment, page 2. So the logo changed also, so it's no more that gear logo, you have the gear and then some equipment right in the middle. Now it's quite different. Colors remain, really, but it's different. I think it's two shapes. So I call it a square, whatever. But page 2 has more details. We're going into that for you this morning to understand what to expect and what this means. But take a look at this one on top of nameplate. Power supply to drop again. TCN alerts Nigerians. Just how low or how lower can it drop? EFCC officer threatened me to indict Jonathan Adoke. Witness tells court. There's a couple of other stories, quite interesting. Well, I'll leave it there for Nigeria News Direct.
There's a lot to tell also from the front page of the Daily Trust newspapers this morning, as the paper chooses to go with the ASU strike. And it says, FG, ASU disagree as Buhari directs end to strike in 2 weeks. Take a look at the riders. We won't sit with Labour Minister. That's according to the union. And NLC continues mobilization for protest. Lastly, we won't accept disparity in varsity workers' salaries. That's according to SANU. So there's a whole lot of problem that will be dealt with even after, the impasse with ASU has been resolved. Well, that's it with that. Take a look at this just beneath that big story. Kidnapped Kaduna Catholic priest, villagers killed. That was one story that made headlines yesterday. That's a sad one.
Very sad one.
We commiserate with the Catholic Church and indeed the families of the Catholic priest. All right, just before we exit the Daily Trust newspapers, let's go beneath the nameplates to look at some stories. Reactions as Buhari unveils new Nnpc. We'll be taking a look at that this morning. And we also have 2023 elections will be best ever in Nigeria's history. That's according to the INEC chair, Professor Yakubu. And lastly, inflation. CBN warns of further tightening, hikes interest rate to 14%. Of course, we anticipated that yesterday. That's the Daily Trust newspapers. Maupe.
Leadership has this one for you. After 156 days of industrial action, PMB gives Education Minister 2 weeks to end varsity strikes. ASU blames Ngige, says strike continues, asks government to prioritize education. We won't accept any disparity in varsity salaries. That's from SANU. Well, there's going to be a negotiation with ASU. Well, SANU is certainly going to be looking on to see how that negotiation goes. But you already hear the word. We would not accept any disparity in varsity salaries. Well, look at this. New Nnpc unveiled for Nigeria's energy security. It's a quote, quoting someone. Page 7 is where they give you all of the details, speaking to the picture, which happened yesterday at the State House Banquet Hall. Look at other stories you see here. Bandits kidnapped 10 policemen. Yesterday was soldiers. Today, it's policemen. Kill Catholic priest, 9 others in Kogi, Kaduna, Katsina. So these events have spanned a number of states, and they have all of the details for you on page 7. Also something that happened yesterday, very importantly too, in the business world, interest rates to rise as inflation rises. That's according to the Monetary Policy Committee. They raised interest rates to 14% yesterday. So you might want to read what the implications of that will be on page 25. A number of other stories on the corner here, but this one might interest you. Airlines dump low demand routes as Jet A1 nears 900 naira per litre. So while we're having this conversation around new and Nnpc, there certainly will be a lot of talk around where the energy is at, because Nigerians need it more than ever for their homes, for transport, and it has to be energy that is affordable, energy that is clean, energy that is efficient. So a lot of things to talk about today. Page 26, I will give you details of how Jet A1 is nearing 900 naira per litre and the implications of that for airlines. Let's leave it there for leadership newspapers.
I mean, all those killings reported everywhere, that they raised a lot of concern. Even you could also see in Guardian how they reported about Oprah over killing of 14 Imo youths in our mama. So, human life, what does it mean? These kind of things are things that we need to stamp out and address headlong, actually. Well, look at the Nigerian Tribune this morning. Strike continues, ASU adamant. Union insists on UTAS signing of renegotiated agreement. Resolve ASU issue within 2 weeks, Buhari tells Education Minister. You know, but the thing is, I mean, it's been on for months now. So can they do that in 2 weeks? So if you don't expect, if that doesn't happen in 2 weeks, well, I guess we'll just see what happens.
What then will the president do, or what will be the next line of action?
But that means has anything been done about the prison jailbreak after the president visited? You know, he said he was utterly disappointed with the way that happened. So
And he asked a lot of questions.
Well, we've been seeing,
if I missed out on a lot of things.
we've been seeing rearrests here and there, but I think for the main ones,
no heads rolling yet.
Oh,
None
of course
yet.
not.
And let's not forget the Minister of Interior has spoken. Had
So
quite
is
a
it
lot
business
to
as
say.
usual? Wow. Well, they also don't miss out on what transpired yesterday. Buhari unveils new Nnpcl, others transfer of assets. And so that's our Tribune today.
We'll take a look at New Telegraph next. Buhari orders minister, that's the lead, address ASU other strikes within 2 weeks. Union blames Ngige for prolonged strike as NANS backs NLC set to join protest. Pages 3 and 7. So that's also the big one, really. Over 150 days. Kaduna now dangerous for Christians, says Can. As terrorists kill abducted Catholic priests, we're collaborating with security agencies to neutralize threat. That's from the Kaduna state government, 7 and 31. The question then is, how long will this neutralizing take? It's been too long, you would say. Ipman, moment unaware of petrol price hike, page 6. So perhaps another angle to the report. But wait, tell us, are you aware? What is your experience? I know Bukola has told us about her experience, but are Nigerians aware of the price hike? Let us know. Send us a mail, tweet at us, so we can balance this information. That's the New Telegraph this morning.
Yes, indeed, very essential, Coyote. Yeah. And from New Telegraph, let's turn our attention to the Vanguard newspapers this morning. And it has quite a lot to say, well, contained in the riders anyway, particularly as it has to do with the ASU strike. Buhari gives Adamu 2 weeks to resolve varsity union strike. Now, let's dig into the riders. Directive doesn't mean government serious. That's attributed to ASU. It's a welcome relief. Parents, we want its resolution even in 24 hours. That's coming from the Nigeria Labour Congress. FG has done everything possible to assuage ASU, attributed to a source. Explains why lecturers refuse to accept IPs. That's IPPPIS, says many lecturers. Children studying in private universities overseas. Count us out of strike. Breakaway ASU faction. That's Konua. That's another interesting dimension to the ASU strike. So what's Konua's position? Why are they not joining the strike? Well, you'll have to find out if you pick up a copy of the Vanguard newspapers and return to page 5. Now, very quickly, let's look at some other stories. Vote buying. INEC proposes a life ban for guilty politicians' parties. And just one more before we exit the front page of the Vanguard newspapers. Nnpc Limited will guarantee Nigeria's energy security. That's according to the president. Should we go through Mr. and Mrs. this morning, or we should leave it for the viewers to decide? Well, we'll leave it for the viewers to look through it themselves.
That's not democracy. You didn't allow us to vote on this, but it's okay. I mean,
well, you didn't vote early enough.
How long does your polling unit open for? 2 seconds?
Split second. No accreditation.
No beavers.
Oh, dear.
Oh, well, poor people. Anyways, Daily Times is the next one here. Buhari gives Adamu 2 weeks ultimatum to resolve varsity strike as ASU blasts Ngige, says he's behind prolonged strike, denies breakout faction. So that story is right there for you. It's on page 2 of the Daily Times. And look at this. Nnpc, CBN further hikes benchmark interest rate to 14%. I think you already saw that elsewhere. Retains CRR at 27.5%, LR at 30%. But take a look at this. Two stories to stand out for me here. Insecurity. Name, shame sponsors of terrorism. TUC urges federal government. That story is right there. And look at this. Tragedy averted as Dana flight lands safely in Abuja after declaring emergency. So the high cost of aviation fuel has implications, because right now, yesterday we read that the NCAA is deepening its survey of regulations, trying to make sure that airlines are not cutting corners as a result of the high cost of aviation fuel and high cost of doing business within the aviation sector. We hope, I'm sure that there will be an investigation into this particular incident, but these are the kinds of things that make people usually afraid as to whether or not standards will be compromised if, you know, the cost of doing business is so high within this particular sector. You might want to read page 3 of the Daily Times to get more details into how tragedy was averted as Dana flight lands safely in Abuja after declaring an emergency. I'll certainly be very thankful for everyone on that flight, and also I'll continue to keep Nigerian travelers, yes, even those who go by road, in our prayers. That's it for the Daily Times. Over now to you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, that ends a look at the dailies as well today, but we will be back in just a moment, so stay with us.
A lot of catching up to do here from players in this industry, project promoters, heads of agencies, bankers, IOCs, indigenous asset owners, and people from the gamut of services in the oil and gas industry. The venue, the State House, also underscores the magnitude of the step being taken in translating an enterprise that's always been state-owned into a commercial entity now stripped of sovereign guarantees for accessing funds.
Sharing agreement.
44 years after, the Nnpc Limited, courtesy of a new set of regulations called the Petroleum Industry Act, is being unveiled and to be charged to go start a new life in the world of global energy business space. Quite a lot of time was allowed for folks to interact, which eventually paved way for President Muhammadu Buhari to join the ceremony. Mr. President is the man of the moment, and proudly so. He has a history with the national oil company that is today transforming right before his eyes. And of course, he played a significant role both times.
We are transforming our petroleum industry to strengthen its capacity and market relevance for the present and future global energy priorities. The provision of PIA 2021 have given the Nigerian petroleum industry a new impetus with improved fiscal framework, transparent governance, enhanced regulation, and the creation of a commercially driven and independent national oil company.
And for the man who is the last group managing director of Nnpc as a corporation and the first group CEO of the new company, he will superintend over the company's large asset, which should give tangible value.
This indeed is a new day, a new hope, and a new opportunity to upscale our relevance in the global energy community as Africa's largest energy company by deepening natural gas production to create low-carbon alternatives and positively change the story of energy poverty at home. We have taken a strategic initiative to achieve our mandate of ensuring energy security for our country by rolling out a comprehensive expansion plan to grow our fuel retail presence from the 547 to over 1,500 outlets within the next 6 months.
By the books, we are told that owing to encumbrances of how the corporation was run, we lost about $70 billion inflow, and a reversal of such trend is what government seeks.
The Nnpc Limited will operate as a profitable commercial entity and declare dividends to its shareholders. The company will demonstrate higher levels of performance and accountability to continue to win the hearts of its over 200 million shareholders.
Then this icing. So what's the implication of the new Nnpc Limited on the nation's finances?
What it means to the fiscals of the Federation is that they will be paying to the government taxes, all categories of taxes that companies are to pay, and also be paying dividends to the government. What will be significantly different is that they will not be remitting to the Federation on a monthly basis revenue on sales. So we have to wait until the accounts are reviewed and audited, and we will work out a process how that will work in a seamless manner to make sure that the Federation is adequately funded.
And for the business community, who now have a new entrant and competitor?
You can't really compare us with the Nnpc. Nnpc is a much bigger, larger corporation with a lot of reserves in oil and gas, and really they are going to go up there and do quite well.
The countdown is on. The clock has started to tick. Africa's largest company has emerged. Still, the PowerPoint presentations should pave way for action points. Olu Phillips, Channels Television News.
Well, yes, those gentlemen join us this morning to shed light on what to expect, the implication of that launch of the new Nnpc Limited. Dr. John Arena is the former president of the Nigerian Society of Chemical Engineers. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, good morning.
Mr. Johnson Chukwu joins us virtually. He is the CEO of Cowrie Asset Management Limited. Good morning as well. Thank you for joining us on the program today. All right, so Dr. Arena, let's start with you. Now that this has happened, of course, leveraging on PIA, perhaps Section 53(1), operationalizing the activities of Nnpc, taking the new form and a new shape, how is this expected to play out?
Well, we expect that the new Nnpc Limited is now going to be subject to the laws of CAMA, the Corporate Affairs Commission. It's no longer going to be subject to the old Nnpc law which set up the corporation several decades ago. So in principle, it's supposed to operate as a commercial entity, a profit-making organization, and render returns to the shareholders at the end of every financial year.
But at the moment, because there are already questions concerning the operations, how they will play in this particular sector, because, yeah, over the years, many have seen Nnpc as, who knows, they describe it as a cash cow where certain things happen. But with this operating as a company, do you see them immediately transiting and ensuring that those financial questions are immediately sorted? Financial accountability?
Well, no, it's not, well, if we're talking about financial accountability, well, when a company is operating under commercial discipline, you do expect a very high level of financial accountability. But let's not kid ourselves. This must be seen as a kind of transitional phase for the new company, and it will take a while before the structures settle down properly. But we must also note that for now, the new Nnpc Limited is 100% owned by federal government of Nigeria on behalf of 200 million people of this country. So,
did you expect a change?
So to that extent, in practice, I may not expect a lot of changes, because it's going to be very difficult to discipline government officials and politicians from meddling in the affairs of the
What about with the ownership? Would you expect not 100% ownership by the government?
Well, at this stage, in fairness, given what we've set ourselves to do, this is the logical direction to go. And then the statement we've heard from the key people concerned is that in another 1 year or thereabout, they expect to be able to float the stocks of the new company in the stock exchange and avail the investing population of Nigeria the opportunity of acquiring shares and interest in the new company.
So essentially, this is not really the destination. This is maybe the bus stop. Eventually, it can be sold.
That is the destination. Whether we'll get there or not is a different
thing entirely. Just to be clear, break it down for people. What could the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation not do that the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited can now do?
The best way I think I can put it is that the corporation was a government entity. They were open to the summons of government and its officials. The company is no longer a government entity, and they're not answerable to anybody in government.
But it's still 100% by
They're
government.
answerable to the board of directors, which is appointed by government.
Is that why some are arguing that what has happened to the Nnpc is a commercialization, not a privatization? And by the way, what are the implications of that?
When you say Nnpc, how does it say? Company or corporation?
In saying Nnpc, I understand the corporation.
Yeah.
Well, you see, these are intricate issues. Maybe we'll go back to history. There have been several efforts in the past to commercialize Nnpc.
Yeah.
For I remember vividly in the late 1980s, the subsidiary companies of Nnpc were actually incorporated as limited liability companies under CAMA. Even though the group itself, the corporation itself, remained a government entity. So it was kind of a hybrid, but it never really worked. Those are limited liability companies on paper, but in practice, they were.
So what about now? Because Nnpc is still the holding company for those subsidiaries now.
Now, what has happened is that the entire Nnpc, the entire corporation, has transited to a limited liability company. So, and that is in principle. But for as long as it's still 100% owned by government, it is doubtful whether much is going to change in reality.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Chukwu, so for you, what changes having seen that transition from Nnpc to Nnpc Limited?
Thank you once again, Chamberlain. What has changed principally is that the Nnpc, Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, is no longer a company incorporated as a publicly owned entity, but is now incorporated as a private company. What that means is that previously the incentive system under the public sector is such that you don't get rewarded because of your performance. You get rewarded because you are occupying a position. As it stands today, Nnpc Limited will no longer expect any disbursement from FAC accounts or any disbursement from government. They will not expect any funding from government other than the capitalization that came from government, so the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. So it has to fend for itself. It has to be profitable. If it's not profitable, it will not be able to pay salaries. And if it doesn't pay salaries, then the ownership as stands today, the federal government of Nigeria or you and I could ask that the management should be exited because they cannot run the company effectively, efficiently. So what other things that has happened is that today Nnpc Limited can go to the capital market and raise funding without a federal government guarantee. Previously, the corporation could not have gone to the capital market to raise funding. So it then means that Nnpc Limited can compete with any private sector-driven entity globally. It can go to London Stock Exchange. It can get listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It can raise money from any funding source globally, and it has to be accountable for any fund it raised. Unlike previously, where it raises money and the federal government of Nigeria become liable or the primary obligor for any fund that Nnpc, Nigerian National Corporation, raised. So you are going to have an entity that we now be required to in place a higher level of corporate governance standard, higher level of transparency, higher level of accountability, and higher level of reporting, such that for every kobo it spends, it must ensure that it gets value for money. unlike what obtains when an institution is owned by the government. And subsequently, promotions and appointment into its board and management will now be based on merit and not based on the whims and caprices of those in public service, because it will not be driven by profitability, by efficiency, and ensure that there is sufficient return to all stakeholders. When I talk of stakeholders, you're talking of government, then the public, the society, the employees, and every other stakeholder in that value chain, including the communities where they are operating.
Well, just to follow up, and I'd like you to clear this up. It's a double-edged question. So you said that if Nnpc Limited is not profitable enough or is not performing as Nigerians expect it to, they can clamor for a change. But, you know, going through Section 53, particularly 3, that essentially says the ownership of all shares in Nnpc Limited shall be vested in government, the incorporation essentially held by the Ministry of Finance, Incorporated, the Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated, and all of that. How much of a say, then, can Nigerians have in a company that is still owned and essentially administered, for the lack of a better term, I mean, eventually, by government, really?
Well, as it stands today, the Minister of Finance Incorporated is a proxy for you and I in making investment in Nnpc. So when they publish their performance reports, we will compare them to what companies with the same level of assets globally are reporting, particularly companies, same level of assets with the same level of business. So you and I have a duty to cry out and say, look, this current management is not effective, it's not optimizing our economic resources, because we're all stakeholders in Nnpc Limited. But going forward, that is one aspect of it. Going forward, the government will eventually have it privatized, where you also have individual shareholders, where you and I can subscribe to the shares of Nnpc Limited, where we will reconstitute the board and then bring in not only co-shareholders, minority shareholders, independent shareholders to the board, who will ask more penetrating questions, and who will ensure that in terms of governance, that the board is properly doing the right things.
Well, pardon me, Mr. Chiku, weren't we all, over 200 million Nigerians, shareholders, stakeholders in the corporation, the Nnpc Corporation? I mean, essentially, government was there to administer it for the people. So we were still shareholders and stakeholders in the previous arrangement, weren't we?
Yes, we were. But remember, the previous corporation was not profit-driven. It was basically for managing the oil and gas assets of the country. Profitability was not one of its key performance indicators. Then, at that point, it was about, is it really standing in the gap or standing in on behalf of the government? So we had no overriding responsibility to ensure that it operated effectively, efficiently, and made returns, and commensurate returns in tandem with the assets it was managing.
I'd like you to elaborate more on the funding part of it. You talked about how the Nnpc can no longer depend on government for funding, and it now essentially has to make money in order to be able to pay salaries and all of that. What about, you know, the usual remittances of funds into Federation accounts? Under the new arrangement, can the federal government still depend on the new Nnpc for Federation accounts remittances?
Okay, you know, Nnpc was managing the sale of crude for Nigeria. So as it stood then, all payment for crude were coming to Nnpc, the corporation. Today, that has changed. So we are going to have a company whose primary business is to operate the assets that is under its control and make profit, and then it could pay interim dividend. Just Nnpc is going to be like LNG, where the federal government or Minister of Finance Incorporated is a shareholder, and then at intervals, either half yearly or annually, LNG will report performance and then pay dividends. So that's what Nnpc will be. But they are assets that are owned by the federal government, oil assets that are owned by the federal government. If Nnpc is expected to manage those assets, then they will get fees for managing the assets. Then whatever return that is due to Federation account on those assets will be passed on to Federation account. They are assets that are owned by NPDC. And those assets, which NPDC, which is a subsidiary of Nnpc, will be purely based on performance at the end of the half year or at the end of the quarter, and what will come to the government will be dividend.
So indeed, the president did confirm that there was a transfer of assets from the Nnpc, that's Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, to the new company. But what about the liabilities? Before now, we do know that there was some under recovery with the Nnpc, which was affecting the Federation account, so to speak. How is that going to play out now? We know that somehow the federal government is still subsidizing petrol, and the Nnpc has been the one in charge of crude oil swaps, so to speak. How is that arrangement? Is it clearly spelled out what is going to happen going forward?
Yes, what will happen going forward is that, like I said earlier, there could be assets that are part of the federal asset or federation assets, which Nnpc could be managing for the federation. So for those assets, what will happen is that sales proceeds from those assets or revenue from those assets will go to the federation account. Nnpc will get a commission for it. The GMD Nnpc was very explicit on this. He said the price of refined petroleum products is determined by the federal government. The federal government still wants to control the price of refined petroleum products. So what Nnpc will do is, if you ask an agent entity and import products on behalf of the federal government, and in that instance, take a commission for providing that service and pass on the cost to the federal government plus the commission. The federal government will now subsidize the pump price of those products, and that will come from revenue from sale of crude that relates to the federal government, to the federation account, and not from sale of crude that belongs to Nnpc. Nnpc will have its own crude, just like Shell and Ajib or any of the other oil companies, including local oil companies, have their own crude. But anyone that is not Nnpc crude that belongs to the federation will then be from revenue from that will be used to subsidize petroleum products. So if there is any under recovery, it will come from an amount that should have gone or should have been distributed to the three tiers of government. So in that case, that cost will be borne by the three tiers of government and not by Nnpc. So in the case of stranded assets, which is basically what you are referring to, if the assets that are not viable and are not taken on by Nnpc Limited, and what the federal government will have to do is either they auction those assets or pass it on to a liquidator that will obviously, over time, liquidate those assets.
Dr. Arena, in terms of service delivery, we know that, look, it's a culture. So now that they're transiting, it's not going to be a stroll in the park. How do you see this happening for the Nnpc? Yeah,
like I said, what you're going to see in the coming months and perhaps years will be a transitional phase. Yes, the new Nnpc Limited is subject to the discipline of the marketplace. Yeah. But it takes a while to develop the culture, to develop the structures, to develop the practices that will enable them to operate effectively.
Do they have that time? Because they're supposed to hit the ground running,
Well, they are supposed to, but in reality, it doesn't always work out that way, I can assure you.
But really, we've not seen a change in workforce. Essentially, it's still the same Nnpc corporation that is coming into the limited. And we know how civil service works, how there's been a lot of clamor for corporate governance in civil service, essentially. So do you still see much happening? Because as Chamberlain said, this was meant to have happened years ago, like yesterday. So do we have that much time to wait for a transition from civil service to private sector, as it were?
I hope you're not calling for them to throw people into the streets and render them jobless. Well, again, these things are going to take, in the best of times, they'll take a little while because this is now a new situation. The management has to now rationalize the workforce and make sure that it's fit for purpose.
But there is the sentiment that, you know, Nnpc, even the new Nnpc is still tied to the apron strings of government. And as a result, nothing is really going to change as far as workforce is concerned.
That's why I say it, in principle, that's the direction they're supposed to go. In practice, being 100% owned by government is still going to be an inhibiting factor. Let's not kid ourselves.
You know,
it's going to be difficult to win government officials off the old habits of meddlesomeness in the
while
affairs
they're
of
still expected to make profit.
Well, while they're still expected to make profit. After all, the people who are running the new company are still the old officials who are appointed by government.
Wow.
The board of directors is appointed by government. Yeah. So we need to be a little careful.
But
so
the thing about
it's a case of cautious optimism.
The other part of this, if I let me ask both of you, Mr. Chukwu, now speaking about operations, operationalizing the Nnpc Limited, Nnpc, the corporation, usually relied on their IOC partners in delivering the joint venture. But now that they're in direct competition with them, how is that going to happen? Because now, will the IOC still support them, saying, no, you are competition, so you have to go the whole hog yourself?
Well, what currently obtains is that they are assets that are being operated by MPDC. It is not in all joint venture, most joint venture operations where the IOCs are critical major stakeholders. They are operated by those IOCs. But they are also assets being operated exclusively by MPDC. What will happen going forward is that in the event that Nnpc holds majority stake like it does in many of the JV operations, Nnpc could request that it operates because it's no longer that government corporation that is supposed to be inefficient, that may not necessarily have the technical competence to operate those assets. So you're going to have an upscaling of competence even in Nnpc Limited, which is good for the country because you're going to see a lot more Nigerian developed skills to even operate at standards even better than what the IOCs are operating. And the JV arrangement as we stand today, the way the IOCs are operating, has a lot of drawback for the country as a nation because sometimes the costing that come from the IOCs as per the cost of operating those assets or cost of drilling may not be so transparent. So now that we could have situations where Nnpc Limited, which is a Nigerian entity, corporate entity, would be the ones operating some of those JV assets, it would be better for us. Again, some of the challenges that led to the situation where IOCs were operating assets, because in some instances, the Nnpc was unable to pay its cash costs and therefore had no moral claim to operate those assets if you were unable to pay your cash costs. And costs we are constrained because they were coming from federation accounts. So this will be the case. If, for instance, a shell is going to go to international financial market to borrow funds, Nnpc Limited will also go to the international financial market to borrow funds. So their cost structure will be at parity, and there is no compelling reason why Nnpc should not operate those assets. Like I said, that will create a lot more jobs for local engineers, local competencies, and at the end of the day, we are going to have a situation where we have a broadening and deepening of the knowledge of Nigerians in the operation and in the management of our critical resource.
I mean, competition is good for the sector in any case. After that event, put a question through to Mr. Aliko Dangote about how he sees this new Nnpc Limited coming off the fact that he's also building a refinery. And he essentially said, well, the Nnpc Limited is way bigger. It's said to be the biggest African oil company. And it has been said that government has no business doing business. I don't know if you've heard that time and again, saying, leave the business to private owners. But this is government essentially entering business, appointing the board, literally administering it. So I wonder, do you also see that, do you see the competition as good? Because Nnpc is turned betwixt now making profit and serving the Nigerian people. We know how subsidy has been, what they said, like at least some palliative for the poor. So do you see them torn betwixt trying to operate in a very competitive market and at the same time trying to, be good for Nigerians?
No, in principle, I don't see that conflict. Well, first of all, Nnpc in the past tended to be seen as a sort of regulator. Mm-hmm. And it did actually act as a regulator of some sort. But all that should be in the past now, especially with the strengthened regulatory agencies, and there are two of them in the oil and gas industry. It puts Nnpc squarely in the arena of operations, operating assets. And like I said, we must look at what has happened as a first step in the transition. We are transiting from a publicly owned corporation to a private entity operating under commercial discipline. For as long as government has 100% shares in the company, it's going to be an inhibiting factor. Let's not, I mean, that's a fact. But we expect that, well, we're told that in a year, we hope it happens, that in a year the stakeholding is going to be opened up to the investing public, so that you're going to have infusion of capital from private investors. And that's, of course, means that government control of the company is going to be watered down, it's going to be diluted. So if that happens, and it happens smoothly, then we're going to transit to a situation where the company begins to operate truly as a commercial entity. I don't think it's eureka yet. It should take a little while for us to get there, even with the best of intentions.
Speaking of the competition, let's look at that which is now obtainable in the international market. The Nnpc has its work cut out for it, and it's up against the likes of Saudi Arabia's Aramco, and there's opportunity because of the relaxing of restrictions off of COVID. There's demand for crude oil. Is the Nnpc coming in too late in the day to join in this competition, and what are the challenges before it?
No, I don't think it's too late in the day. As a matter of fact, there are opportunities that have opened up, especially most recently with the war in Eastern Europe between Ukraine and Russia. Europe has woken up to the reality that it's been a little too dependent on Russian oil and gas, and Europe is now shopping around for alternative sources as supplies, and that creates opportunity for us in Nigeria. So Nnpc, we expect, should be at the forefront of ensuring that we get the higher stake of the European market in the years to come.
At least for gas?
Especially for gas. Most especially for gas, yeah.
Okay. I think we're due for a break now. Still a couple of areas to touch on, but we'll be back in a moment. Just stay with us.
Welcome back. So, Mr. Chukwu, now that we've got the Nnpc Limited, what should happen to the refineries?
I think the refineries may be some of those stranded assets. When I spoke earlier, I said we may have some stranded assets that are not economically viable and therefore are not passed on to Nnpc Limited. The refineries, I won't assume, I don't have the figures, I don't have the fact, but I should believe that they are among the stranded assets. They should be among the stranded assets. So in that instance, what the federal government should do is sell those assets to other private sector investors if they are still valued to be extracted from those assets. As it stands today, I doubt if Nnpc Limited will ever go and borrow money in the international market and then put in those assets at their current state. So if it does want to set up refineries, it will set up greenfield refineries, it will set up new refineries. I doubt if they want to go back and invest on those assets, because if you look at the underlying weaknesses or shortcomings of those refineries, we put so much money in them and we've not been able to turn them around. So no business operator will want to throw good money after bad money. That's one aspect. And as it stands today, what they will first do is that, because they are now going to do what we call capital rationing. When they raise money, unlike when the money was coming from a public purse, when they raise money, they are going to rank the investment opportunity they have in order of returns. So the first thing they will look at, which one will give them the highest return, which will give them the lowest return. They will start allocating the financial resources they raised or the capital they raised first to those that will give them the highest return on investment. So, and I don't think the refineries, as it stands today, reactivated old refinery will give them the highest return on investment. Like I said, they would rather go for greenfield refineries if they have to go into that segment of operation. But the first thing that they say, they want to expand their retail outlets to about 1,500. And in a deregulated market, the business is in the last mile, is with the last mile service provider, which is a retail outlet. And I think they want to position to take advantage of that, which will optimize the return on investment. So, but refineries, investing in existing refineries, what they would do is allow federal government to sell the refinery to whoever is interested in buying them, and the person has the capacity to put money there and turn them around, all well and good. But if they have to go into refineries, they should focus on setting up green-free refineries that will be more efficient in terms of creating value.
Well, Dr. Rena, what would you say should be the ideal thing to do? Because some have recommended, look, these refineries can't work. All we need to do is get the IOCs together and say, you know what, you have track records of what you've done globally. Take these refineries, run them, and then remit to the country, rather than just sell them to persons perhaps who don't have that record. And local engineers could also benefit from it.
Well, again, when you say take them, it's a little complicated.
What,
are you taking them for nothing, or are you taking them for a cost? These are issues that need to be sorted out. The IOCs, for instance, are no longer particularly interested in investing into refineries. And it's going to be difficult to get them to focus on refining in Nigeria.
Is it that they are not interested in investing, or they want certain leverage on the part of our laws to allow them determine certain things? Because some of them argue, if you're going to be fixing those prices, it won't be profitable for us. So why should we get in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the price regime is one of the disincentives for IOCs and other international investors to get into the Nigerian market. But having said that, globally, the IOCs had actually been moving away from refining because margins in refining were continuously being eroded. And they were giving up their refining assets in Europe and the United States and different parts of the world, and investing very little in new refining capacity. And this has been accentuated by the energy transition which the world has now walked into. It's no longer fashionable to talk about investing in oil and gas assets, as a matter of fact. So most of them are now focused on investing in alternative and clean energies.
But those countries too, is it that some of them, if you look at some of them, they don't really have fuel, resources, oil resources like we do. Are we supposed to look away from our own mainstay of economy?
Yeah, we see, we're talking about the IOCs. So it's not, the IOCs are not enthusiastic about investing into refining. That's just all I'm trying to explain. But there will still be other investors somewhere, not necessarily the known IOCs, who have the know-how, have the financial capability to invest into refining. I believe that the best way forward for us would have been to find a way of privatizing those refineries, reducing the equity stake of Nnpc, now Nnpc Limited, to a minority shareholding, and to allow people who know how to operate refineries, people who have the wherewithal to come in and assist to get those refineries back to speed.
But yeah. Mr. Chukwu earlier on said that even the Nnpc Limited might not want to touch those refineries because according to him, he believes that this will not give high return on investment. So if the Nnpc that is looking to make profit now might not want to touch it, I wonder who might want to touch it. And I don't know if you can give us closure concerning refineries, because it's been something that has been promised for as long as I can remember. Is it still economically viable to invest in our refineries, either the way the government is going about it or perhaps another option? Should we be putting a lot of energy into the refineries we have in Nigeria?
Yes, because there's still a future for refining in the Nigerian economy. We're not walking away from fossil fuels immediately. We require the petroleum products to sustain the economy. And it's anathema that we produce so much crude oil, export, and then turn around to import the refined products. It's just not, it doesn't sit right. So I believe that in principle, the new Nnpc ought to be interested in operating the refineries.
So you think they should take
the challenge? Oh yes, the challenge is what is the best configuration, what is the best model for them to adopt in getting the refineries to work and to work profitably this time, not just to work as bureaucracy.
Yeah, and you earlier suggested privatization, but with the spate of divestment from the country, even if anyone wanted to take up the refineries, aren't we in dire straits considering the little interest in investing in Nigeria?
Yes. Yeah, that's a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. I believe that if the if the terms and conditions are right, if the necessary reforms are carried out, especially in the pricing structure in the market, then it becomes a little more interesting to some investors to bring in their resources.
Because when you look at it, really, the gas reserves we have in Nigeria is mind-blowing, and I don't know. I think that's enough for anyone to want to invest. I see Nigeria being the new bride now. I mean, you talk about the Russia-Ukraine situation, how it's difficult to get gas from Russia. So European countries are looking at alternatives, and I see Nigeria increasingly being sought after like the new bride. But tell us what this will do to the price of petrol as well. You know, the refineries is one part of the conversation, but the price of petrol, I mean, lots of people buying a different price, over 200, 187, 170 something. So with Nnpc Limited, that is profit-driven. What would happen to the price of petrol? Would it be left to the market forces? I mean, set the price as you ought or as you feel since you want to make profit, or what?
Well, I wish I can say I'm not in government. Government determines the pricing structure in the marketplace today. Nnpc is not going to determine the price. Nnpc is acting on behalf of government. The government says, oh, this is the price, it's well and good. We'll give you the product and it's sold at that price. But if it's less than our cost, then we'll have to recover that cost from other sources. So it means that you're owing us money. We spent money on your behalf. So that is strictly speaking not Nnpc's problem. It's a problem for government. It's an issue for government to determine.
All right. As we wind down, Mr. Chukwu, now that this has happened, should we expect Nnpc to still be the sole importer of fuel? Because, I mean, you've seen several people clamoring for different things. So they will also have a lot more retail outlets. So what should happen moving forward?
But in the meantime, I think Nnpc may retain the sole importer of fuel. And the simple reason is that of FX, foreign exchange scarcity. There are two options available to the country, is to start allocating foreign exchange to all oil marketing companies so that they can import products. We've had that experience in the past, which led to the subsidy issues. You recall when under the President Jonathan, there were investigations after his government of subsidy scams because people were going to demand for Forex and they didn't import the Forex and they just use the Forex. So that's what has constrained the country into making Nnpc the sole importer of refined petroleum product, not because other companies can't import, but you have to deal with scarcity of FX and allocation of FX. And the government, in its wisdom, felt that it is better to centralize that allocation to an institution that is owned by the government, that the government has direct charge over that institution. And that's why Nnpc is the sole importer of petroleum products. So probably when we fully deregulate, you know, the president has put the deregulation, we deferred it by 18 months. When we fully deregulate, and then each party, all the parties, including Nnpc, will source for Forex in the open market, then they or other operators can be in a position to compete in the importation of petroleum products. But ultimately, our focus should be how do we get to a point where we refine enough petroleum products for our consumption and possibly for export, which is where countries that are major producers of crude, and that's what we should be striving to achieve.
Quickly, as we wind down now, if this will work as we all desire, we have so much resources, so much capacity, so much potential. What one advice, I know it's maybe hard, would you give government in going down this lane?
I think the major thing that is left now is to diversify the ownership of Nnpc Limited, to bring in private sector investors, to bring in you and I as co-investors, and then that will introduce high level of corporate governance, and that will ensure that the long-term objective of changing the nomenclature ownership of Nnpc from Nnpc Corporation to Nnpc Limited will be achieved. Once you have diverse shareholding, diverse board members, independent directors, as a result of sale of the shares of the company to private sector investors, to institutional investors, to individual Nigerian stakeholders, we're going to have an enduring entity that will achieve its ultimate objective.
Very quickly, Mr. Chukwu, I wonder if you covered it earlier on. Under the new regime, what form should subsidy now take?
Subsidy will still remain, as it stands today, a direct deduction from monies accruing to the Federation account. because that's the only way it can be expensed. That's the only way it can be deducted. Because Nnpc Limited will not go and borrow money from the capital market or the financial system and then begin to subsidize and hope the federal government will pay them. So it's going to be what will now be distributed is the net after the deduction of subsidy. As it stands today, the subsidy is now warehoused at the federation account allocation level, where revenues accruing to the 3 tiers of government will be subject to deduction for subsidies.
All right, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, CEO of Cowrie Asset Management Limited, as well as Dr. John Erina, who is the former president of Nigerian Association of Chemical Engineers. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be back in a moment. Don't go away.
Well, that was the comments of the INEC chairman, Professor Mahmood Yakubu, coming from the last of the off-cycle season elections, which happened in Osun State. It seems to have stirred up a hope of confidence in Nigerians and even in the commission itself. You can see the INEC chairman there beaming with smiles and sounding very confident in terms of the kinds of elections that they hope to deliver to Nigeria in 2023. But this morning we're going to be speaking with chieftains of the political parties to see if they also share his optimism and what exactly needs to be done to make the 2023 elections the best elections that INEC has ever put forward. This morning, I'm joined by two very gentlemen right here in our studios in Abuja. Mr. Ibrahim Modibo is the former member of the APC Presidential Campaign Council, and Dr. Onoha Nnachi is a PDP chieftain, a finance expert, and an infrastructure economist. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, you heard the INEC chairman yesterday. I'm sure if you didn't hear him yesterday, now you've heard him in our studios this morning. And you can see that even the commission feels quite confident in terms of how it has conducted itself and perhaps its preparations for the 2023 elections. Would you say that this confidence is in the proper perspective? Because some people will say, oh, you've only delivered, this is one election, just one election, governorship election in an off-cycle season, and you've been able to put all your resources into it. What are the chances that when you have multiple elections happening in all the 36 states, you will be able to deliver the same results? Do you share his confidence?
Yes, I do share his confidence from a particular perspective. The success of our Osun election could be attributed to technology being used and how effective that technology was. And if you look at technology, some of us has always believed that technology is the basic tools you can use to correct some ill malpractices, fraud in the system. And this particular election has shown that. If you take a typical example in a show election, they had over 1.9 million registered voters. They had about 1.4 million PVC collected. Shortage of another 500 was not collected. And you also see that the turnout of the vote, the total vote cast, which was at least it was up to 800,000. Looking at those numbers together, if you do a percentage calculations between the 800 plus and the 1.4 million of PVC collected, you begin to realize that the turnout was above 50%, and that is a good record to hold. Now, what it tells us from the election perspective is now more Nigerians are willing to come out to vote, more Nigerians are eager to put their trust into the election system. It also shows that how bad the economy must have affected them for them to even come out to drive such voting. We are talking of an economy where the commodity price is not something to write home about, an economy where the students are still at home today out of ASO strike, where the education budget is not even implemented up to 40–50%. You're talking of an economy where inflation as of 2012 was at a single digit 8.25. As of today, we're looking at inflation at 18%. We're talking of where the CBN just increased interest rate to 18%. We're talking of an economy where, as of 2012 to 2015, our budget market in this country.
Did you say CBN increased interest rate to 18%?
Yes.
14%.
14.
Yes, 14.
No, the APR
yes,
added
14%.
by 100 basis points,
point.
making it 14.
Yeah, 14%.
Sorry about that. Now, looking at those indices, I need us to take to know how bad it has hit the nation. As of 2012 to 2015, our budget was operating between 4.8 trillion to 5 point there. If you convert that to USD, we were operating with a budget of about $31 billion. In 2022, last year, we operated, and 2021, we operated a budget of 13.080. 13 point, and still convert that to USD, it was the same 31 point. So in 10 years gap, you can realize that you were operating a budget of 4.8 and it was 31 billion. You're operating a budget of 13 point. It was the same 31 billion. So you just realize that the effects on the citizens, on the people, has made this forthcoming election a referendum on bad governance, a referendum for change, a referendum for new things, a referendum for development. And that becomes a very critical thing. So there are various perspectives you look at it. Over the last 6 months or 1 year plus, we've had several system failures, power system failures that happen. You know how this affects the industries, the manufacturing industry. And it becomes very painful. And you ask yourself, what causes these failures? Simple infrastructure.
I'm trying to go back to the elections. So you've spoken about, excuse me, you've spoken about how, you know, the introduction of technology has made a great difference. I do not know if you agree with him, because yes, indeed, some people will say that since 2015, when we have seen the implementation or the introduction of incremental technology, it would seem that we have been seeing different types of results. For you, would you say it rests more with technology, or would you say that it's the Electoral Act?
Well, you know, Dr. Noah, if I'm right, yes, has delved into the economy, while this topic is about democracy, about voting system. Now, by way of introduction, let me congratulate Mr. President. Let me congratulate INEC for doing a very wonderful job. I think it has been incrementally increasing in terms of performance profile of INEC in conducting elections in this country. And my commendation to Mr. President is born out of this patriotic and nationalistic desire to see that Nigeria has been placed on the pedestal of good and functional democracy. He has allowed it. Whether we like it or not, when he came in, he had the 3 points bullets of taming insecurity, fixing the economy, and also fighting corruption. And by so doing, there are 2 other bullets: open the political field for mass participation, and also give the country a viable electoral process that could stand the test of time and democracy. Now, if you look at Nigeria as it is today, we must commend the INEC chairman for coming out to show Nigerians that, look, we can have good elections. And the Osun election is a pointer. If you look at what it did in Anambra, Edo, Anambra, coming to Ekiti, it has been improving by the day. Agreed that in Ekiti there was a lot of problems here and there because of vote buying and what have you, where the candidate of the SDP, former governor, was also almost costing home, but somewhere along the line, there were some problems here and there. But this has been sorted out. If you look at what INEC did, was to see that it deploys the BVAS, the BVAS bimodal verification system. Mm-hmm. You see, this deployment of technology by INEC, it has deployed over 5,735 BVAS to a constituency of about the polling units of about 3,570-something, with 330 polling units in 30 local governments. This is a state that could pride itself as having over 4 million population. But we had 1.9 million, the voting capacity, but only 1.4 million have been able to have their PVCs. And if you look at the total aggregate distance of the voting populace at the end of the whole thing, it was about, as the doctor stated, it's about 800,000. And I think it's a good mark. Anything above 50% is a good mark. So I think Nigeria has come of age. INEC, in its wisdom, has been able to deploy this. And also, I must commend the workers, the security agents. The police have been able to deploy about 21,000 security men. And also, if you look at the way and manner...
Why you talk about the gamut,
yes.
I mean, of all the things that were deployed to make the elections a success in Osun, I mean, you've gone all the way to Edo State, and then, you know, also talked about Anambra. INEC says that for it, the biggest achievement it had in Anambra was that elections held. In a situation where people were very skeptical that the polls were going to hold at all. I'm just wondering how you think that this can be replicated, how this can, if this were like a model for what we're looking at for 2023, how do you think it's going to work for 2023?
You see, my fear, if INEC could deploy all 5,000 BVS, the bimodal verification machines, to one state with over 21,000 security, police, would the system, would INEC be able to galvanize the security apparatuses that went there, as well as the bimodal voting system that has been deployed to all the states of the Federation? If yes, then I think we're coasting home. But my fear is that maybe they might not have the necessary wherewithal to be able to cope with the population and also demand a dynamics of operational democracy, which has to do with the people, because people now are very interested in voting. People are yearning for change. People are also looking forward to a democratically elected president in 2023 that could give Nigeria a sense of belonging, that could make Nigeria work. The economy should be fixed, insecurity be tamed, and also looking at the issue of corruption. These are very fundamental issues that strikes a kind of, it's a big problem that has bedeviled this country. And therefore, there is a need for INEC to come up with the possibilities of addressing some of these systems. If, in fact, they have the resources, the wherewithal, the manpower, and also the psyche. Because if you look at the conduct of INEC officials in Ekiti, and also coming to Osun, it is something of pride to Nigerians, because they've been able to conduct themselves very well. The elections was to a large extent peaceful, although we know in all democracies all over the world, there's no perfect democracy where you don't have pitfalls here and there. But having stated this, INEC has been able to do very well. I've never seen Professor Jega, but one-on-one, but I have commended him with the way and manner he has been able to conduct INEC and also the officers for giving Nigeria a sense of belonging.
Well, Professor Jaga was...
I mean, Professor
Mahmoud Yakubu.
Yes, excuse me. Yes.
Let me come to you, because you raised the issue of technology. Some people will argue that in 2015, technology was deployed. The elections were still contested. This is 2022, going into 2023. INEC says, we've spoken to some INEC officials before now, while the INEC chairman is hoping, the goal for him is to give Nigeria the best elections it's ever had. Some of its officials are also hoping that they will be able to eliminate this issue of election petition tribunals after, you know, elections have been conducted. Do you think that it's a possibility? I mean, given just what we have in the Act, in the Electoral Act, some people said that that was a very big battle. We saw just happen in National Assembly before that came across, and also the introduction of technology.
The truth of the matter is INEC has made tremendous improvements. Technology improvement is a continuous process. 2015, we used card readers.
Indeed.
Card readers does not have the double authentication system. It does not have the double verification system. And also, the card reader does not have a frequency transmission network inbuilt in it. But the BVAS we have has a lot of technology built into it. There is a frequency transmission system built into it. There's a radio frequency identification for you to know where every machine is. So if it moves away, the RFID technology can tell where it is, clearly. So these technologies put in place has presented something much better, much valid. Now, for election sources, there are two parts of it. The electoral employer, which is INEC, and the security people. If you notice the difference between Ekiti and Osun, the security was a little bit less in Ekiti, which gave room for enormous vote buying. But when the security became very, very effective in this, you saw little or no vote buying in Osun. It means it was reduced. So the two parts that are responsible for it have to do the needful. But I still maintain the elections is going to witness a massive turnout. And that massive turnout is a referendum of a failed government, a failed system. And that's where it's coming from. And if you take it from that perspective, take Osun that we just finished. Out of the 1.4, you have over 800 have voted, which is above 50%. And if you put that back into perspective, if at the end of collection of PVC, we have close to 90 million people that have collected, as of today, it's about 84 or 80 something that have done. As that number increases, if you do extrapolation, in the last presidential election, the total vote cast was not up to 30 million. So if you're getting 50% turnout of vote cards, just be rest assured that we're going to have total vote cards for presidency will be in excess of 50 million. And where you did not get up to 30 million in the last one. So there is these new voters, and the anger and the hunger from these new voters is what is important to me from a point of economic perspective. Where are they coming from? What is driving them? It is the pain, the anger of the failed economy by this government that is driving them, and which must be addressed properly. You don't reinforce failure.
So I'm trying my best to focus on the because we're not exactly having a conversation on the debate campaigns are yet to start, but I'm in full blown. I know that INEC set a timetable for that, but what we're looking at is how INEC is going to deliver this elections come 2023. For some people, they think that logistics has always done INEC in. Logistics has been a challenge. Somehow they're overcoming it. They've spoken about how they engage the NERTW. In fact, in the last couple of elections, Ekiti and Osun, INEC said it wasn't going to keep the documents, the INEC documents in the CBN, with the CBN. But, ask that question, how it's going to maintain that sanctity when it has, because it's engaged the services of the Nigerian Air Force and being able to deploy, to deploy the election materials. Questions as to how that is going to be feasible when elections like the general elections. Would you still have any reservations if INEC were to go and engage the services of the CBN for the 2023 elections, given the reason why it withheld engaging with them, engaging their services for Ekiti and Osun elections?
The prerogative of who to engage for such a service remains with INEC. But the most important part of it is the people's mindset. Nigerians have never been fully involved as they are today, and that has a role, a very critical role to play. And if you look at the entire processes, you will see that the engagement of ad hoc staffs and I was even surprised and said, INEC has guts. You're engaging professors that are on strike that have not been paid for this kind of service. It becomes a threat.
That's a risk.
Oh, God. But the important part is everybody wants something good. And when you talk about logistics, it is the willingness of the citizens to participate that makes logistics easy or difficult. You can naturally get volunteers who are willing to sacrifice and say, let's do this for the nation, because of their willingness of participation. And that willingness of participation will make INEC be very, very successful. And you will also realize that the level of voters' educations, and which INEC still have to do more, they still have to engage people on such education to bring them to book what the election is all about, how the voting system is going to work. With that awareness, the logistics will become easier because the people are conscious. What makes logistics difficult is just obstruction by parties. That's what makes it. And when these things, people see that, oh.
Obstruction by parties or desperation on the part of politicians.
Can you separate the politician from their party? They're representing the parties, though. And that is the way I look at it.
Okay, if you say so.
Now, when you see that kind of obstruction, and you realize, when did I realize that such an obstruction will not yield to any result? It will not yield to any result. If you see they are carrying materials and you go and hijack the material, it will not make you win. So what? Why do it? So they will not do it. So I highly believe that INEC has deployed the right technology, but every technology has room for improvement. In a typical way, people will try to undermine it, try to do everything to undermine it, but it is real that this has come to stay. And I must commend INEC. But like the concern Modibo raised about the capacity to deploy the same technology across, I think before now, INEC must have done their calculations of the number of polling units that we have, which is over 130,000 units that we have in the country. And they must have done, if we deploy 1-1, we should also make provision for an emergency up to half of that. And I believe they must have done their logistic planning about those procurement. Because when they requested for their budget, they requested for a enormous budget to accommodate them. And this is really, really very interesting. And I'm also aware at the presidential election, they will deploy some drone monitoring systems that can give physical understanding what is happening in each place. Any flashpoint that they raise, the drone can easily go there, tell you what is happening. And because these beavers are RFID embedded, you can identify where the equipment is. If it's not in the location where it should be, it reports immediately. The person that signed for it is held accountable, and that brings it to the tribunals and cases that will come after it. And until people start going to jail and being locked up, and as election goes on, you see point picked up. INEC is already picking a recommendation where in vote buying, in their next recommendation, whether such politicians could be banned for 10 years or more. And that will begin to make sense to everyone.
I wanted to ask if you had a comment or two on logistics before we go to Lagos.
Yeah, before I go on to that, let me correct an impression here. You see, the mass participation, that's why I always commend Mr. President for opening up the political space for mass participation and also allowing credible electoral process. That is why it is gingering, the youth as well as Nigerians to come out in mass now to participate in democracy. Nigeria for a long time has been buckled under the full weight of a ravenous and greedy political class who sit under trees to just write fictitious results and announce them. And then they start jumping and dancing one before electoral victory. This is not the case now. What we have now is a credible electoral process where we don't see government unnecessary interference. It allowed the process to continue. It also allowed technology, because this is very fundamental. In anything we do, especially under the modern democracy, technology is very fundamental and paramount. It is giving us the result. And therefore, INEC, by deployment of the BVS, the bimodal system, has been able to plug in or to plug the loopholes associated with electoral fraud.
Okay, so you've spoken about that. What about logistics?
Now, about logistics, that's why I've always maintained. I'm sure, like Dr. rightly stated, Dr. Noha, he said maybe INEC must have done their own calculations, but my fear is the functionality. Because even in the Osun elections, there are some BVS, based on the reports I've been able to get, because I've monitored the whole night, the elections, the reports and everything. And I've got almost all the details that have been coming in. There were some BVS that were not functioning maybe because of the failure of the network or the battery system and what have you. But these are issues that will attract a front burner within the confines of INEC intellectual powerhouse, so that they will look at these things to see how they could correct it towards 2023. Because 2023 is not an Osun election. It is not going to be limited in terms of security networking. It's not going to be limited in terms of BVS. It is the whole country. So if it is going to be a whole country, does it have the necessary manpower, the necessary resources, the necessary logistics, and also the necessary components that will give us free and fair election?
Big questions. Well, let us go to Lagos now, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, Dr. Nachi, let me ask you, what is your understanding of how people vote? Because they say, look, all of these challenges, technology that INEC is putting in place notwithstanding, that is a key component, because For instance, positioning of the ballot boxes. If people come in there with cards that are not theirs or certain materials, the police present there cannot arrest them. INEC says, we just point out that, look, you are running foul of the law, so please walk away. They cannot be arrested. But you know what? We need to go to break, but we'll return in just a moment and let you answer that. Don't go away. Dr. Nachi, you know, an INEC official did tell us that if one comes with a card that is not his or hers and they scan the card and find out that it doesn't belong to the person, that's against the law. So that's an infraction. But what they can do at that point in time, in order not to create any chaos, is to simply tell the person, please walk away. And now we know that the law says the policeman who will be within that circumference cannot be armed. So the person, who knows, may choose to walk away or do something else, nobody knows. What should be done at that point? Should we then say, well, we need to first of all find a way to dissuade people, discourage people from even coming to that place by ensuring that if you come there and you run foul of the law, you will not just be asked to walk away, you will be arrested. How should we go about
that? Thank you, Chamberlain. The facts before us is that INEC has their voters' education to do more on that, educating the people to know what to do and how to go about it. Anybody that comes to a polling unit to vote with a wrong voter's card, a stolen voter's card, there is, ab initio, a criminal intentions, which is a very big crime to look at. Whether the police is armed or not armed, it doesn't stop from arrest to be made. But looking at it from the other side of technology point of view, which INEC is also lamenting, as we grow older, our faces changes, and certain things happens along with us. Those that did their voters card about 5 years or 6 years ago must have changed in their physical morphology. And when you appear before the beavers, let's assume that your thumbprint fails and it didn't pick it and it didn't recognize it. You are bound to do the facial recognition, which it is why it is called BI. And if the facial recognition fails, it is not like 2019 or 2015 elections where there was issues of incident card. Incident form, where the person will be asked, okay, fill an incident form, and INEC have what they used to call RATEC, where at the end of the voting, the RATEC will collect all the card and do the collations and all that. But all those things has been eliminated. In my own take, voters' education will help that. But if you come there with a criminal mind, then it becomes a different case. Because when the card bears your name and you have a secondary ID to substantiate that this is you, there should be a way that INEC could address such an issue just because it's a technology failure. But where it is a typical case of criminality, I don't think there's anything more to do other than to arrest the individual and probably get the individual prosecuted. But like I said, there is huge surge for this election, which is being driven by economic factors. Thank you.
Dr. Nachi talked about voter education, and we've brought this up time and again with INEC. And INEC essentially says, yes, we have a job of work to do when it comes to voter education. But for the political parties, they have their work cut out for them. And one of the examples given is, thumbprinting, during elections. And you see some people thumbprinting in the wrong way. And during this election, we had over 18,000 rejected votes, largely as a result of, wrong thumbprinting and all of that. In fact, one of the INEC officials said, instead of sending thugs to polling units now, parties should actually invest in sending, agents that can help, these voters know how to go about it. So I wonder, is that a thinking as well in political parties?
Well, as a chieftain of PDP...
No, that's for Mr. Modibo. Pardon me.
For our vote.
Dr. Nachi, pardon me. That's for Mr. Modibo. Please allow Mr. Modibo respond. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to believe that in trying to give us a credible electoral process, we have to examine this issue in both content and character. The issue of public awareness and reorientation should come from the political parties as well as the National Orientation Agency. For now, maybe due to lack of funding and lack of proper coordination and logistics, the National Orientation Agency seems to be like a toothless bulldog that could never bark nor could it bite a muzzle. It's unfortunate. It has to start something in close collaboration with the media, because the media is very fundamental in trying to bring public awareness to the doorsteps of the masses. If we want to have that change, to have a credible electoral process, the political parties should also have an engagement in close collaboration with INEC. But you see, it's so sad that if you look at the past elections in Osun and Ekiti and Osun, you find out that there hasn't been this galvanization of resources, both human and material, for proper public awareness. It's only towards the end of the towards the electoral, when they were going for voting, that you see people, you know, going to rallies, just a day rallies, and making campaigns, bringing all the top shots, and then putting the whole thing like a jamboree. But I think we should go beyond that. We have to bring contest of ideas rather than conflict of personalities, as we've seen in Osun, where public awareness should have paramount over fighting based on personalities. Let us have superiority in terms of intellectual capacity, in terms of your opinion or what manifesto you have to sell to the people. But it seems as if people are just carried by sentiments, more or less. We've not been seeing manifesto, people talking about what they want to do to people. We see people dancing and they start cheering. And also the youth, you know, because of this social media, they are interested in dancing. That's why you see the governor has won in Ekiti. Very good dancer. However, I want to believe that as a Nigerian, as a politician or as political parties in Nigeria, they should be able to sit down, harmonize issues, look at their program of action, move in, and do make possible door-to-door campaigns based on policies and programs of action. What we are not seeing now is this galvanization. So INEC, close collaboration with the National Orientation Agency, in sync with the political parties and also the media, should act as a broom, should act as a teamwork. There should be a teamwork, harmonization of ideas, so as to sell manifestos rather than selling just conflicts or bringing in sentiments. Nigeria should go beyond this. I thank you.
Well, I believe that, enough has been said on this, and INEC certainly will be taking notes. I believe that there will be further engagements with stakeholders in the coming days, also to continue to reassure the public that given what they have done, they certainly will be able to maybe replicate or multiply same as we go into the 2023 elections. Gentlemen, thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on where we stand or where you stand with regards to what has gone down in both the Osun and Ekiti elections. Mr. Ibrahim Modibo is former member of the APC Presidential Campaign Council, and Dr. Onoha Nachi is a PDP chieftain, a finance expert, and infrastructure economist. Well, we're used to having you here more as an infrastructure economist and a finance expert, and we look forward to having that soon again. Gentlemen, thank you once again.
Thank you, Margaret.
We do have some feedback from our viewers this morning. Adewale Oyilola is talking about Nnpc Limited. He says, or she says, not very sure now, the Nnpc Limited will begin to pay 30% company tax to FIRS, 10% education tax to TED Fund, remit WHD and VAT to FIRS, and pay dividends to shareholders, Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated and Ministry of Finance Incorporated, which will be remitted into Federation account as income from investment in Nnpc Limited. My suggestion will be that the federal government of Nigeria should divest the Nnpc Limited investment and allow all the 774 local governments, that is 6 state governments, corporate organizations and individuals to be the shareholders of the new Nnpc PLC. Then it will be truly a Nigerian company. That's Mr. Oyinlola's, well, I imagine it's a man, Oyinlola's thought this morning.
Well, the important thing is for the revenue to be evenly distributed, especially to all the 774 local governments, as set there by Mr.